I think that in many countries of the world, one of the main causes of prematurity, of course, is preeclampsia. You will hear from Pierre the possibilities of the research that we carried out with Eduardo on the prevention of spontaneous preterm birth by giving women with a short cervix progesterone. I will speak about iatrogenic preterm birth, the doctor decision for preterm delivery because of preeclampsia. Preeclampsia on a worldwide basis is responsible for 75,000 women dying every year and more than 500,000 fetuses and babies dying, mainly because of prematurity. Extensive research that we carried out in the last 20 years has led to the development of a new way of identifying the women that are at risk of developing preeclampsia, and you can do so in the beginning of the pregnancy at 11 to 13 weeks. More than 30 years ago, I described how at the time of the 11 to 13 weeks, we can do an ultrasound scan and measure the nuchal translucency, which is the collection of fluid behind the baby's neck, as a method of identifying fetal Down's syndrome and other chromosomal and genetic conditions. It is at that time of these 11 to 13 weeks that you can also predict who will develop the most severe types of preeclampsia by combining the information from maternal history, because the risk for preeclampsia increases with the age of women and their weight. It is also higher in women that are Black or from South Asia, in women that had a previous preeclampsia or whose mother developed preeclampsia, and in those that conceived by in vitro fertilization and have chronic hypertension, diabetes, or autoimmune disease. And with this information from the history, you get the starting risk, and then at 12 weeks, we do three things. We measure the blood pressure, we measure the blood flow in the uterine arteries by Doppler, and we measure the placental growth factor in the mother's blood. And the combination of these three factors can identify 90% of the women that will develop the most severe preeclampsia, which causes delivery before 34 weeks, and 80% of those that develop preeclampsia that leads to preterm delivery before 37 weeks. But we are not so good in the prediction of term preeclampsia. And then a few years ago, we did a big study involving this triple test, and we showed that we have a good prediction of early and preterm preeclampsia. The question often that I am asked is, but do we need to do the triple test because we in Brazil are poor and we cannot measure placental growth factor? Or others tell me, we in the United States of America have money, but we cannot do uterine artery Doppler. And they say, it doesn't matter. You can do a double test, only blood pressure and Doppler, or only blood pressure and placental growth factor. And then the detection rate is not 90%, but it's 81%. It is still a lot better than what we have now. Because what we have now is just to ask the questions. The next question is, now that we can identify at 12 weeks this very high-risk group, what can we do? Well, a few years ago, we published in the New England Journal of Medicine a study where we took 26,940 women that had the triple test in England and in Spain and in Belgium and in Italy and Greece and so on. And we identified the high-risk group, and then we gave them either aspirin, 150 milligrams every day. I know that in Brazil, you have 100 milligrams, which is fine, or placebo. And in this study, we showed that in the group that had aspirin, we reduced the risk of the most severe types of preeclampsia by nearly 90%. So, first trimester screening identifies 90% of preeclampsia before 32 weeks, and aspirin prevents 90% of that. And this is a major impact on severe prematurity. We also predict 80% of preeclampsia before 37 weeks, and we prevent more than 60% of preterm preeclampsia. So in my mind, here we have a cause of maternal and fetal perinatal death that can be predicted quite effectively and to a great extent can be prevented. And I ask people, but why is it not implemented? What is wrong with the human race? In England, they invest a lot of money in nuclear weapons and also in the United States of America. They spend a lot of money to find ways to kill each other, but the governments don't have the morality to spend a little bit of money to prevent their women and their babies from dying. And for as long as I am alive, I will campaign against these governments and their immorality. In Brazil, like in many other countries in Latin America, women receive calcium. Today, I saw a patient who now lives in London from Mexico, and she told me that she receives calcium. I said, but why? She told me her father is a gynecologist in Mexico, and he advised her to take calcium because it prevents preeclampsia. So I wanted to see the evidence of whether calcium really prevents preeclampsia. And this is a very interesting way of how medicine sometimes develops ideas that are completely wrong. Let me show you why this woman was asked by her father to take calcium and why a lot of women in Brazil take calcium. This doctor from South Africa, a good man, wrote a paper in a very important medical journal, the Cochrane Library. I call this the ultimate level of evidence. he wrote a meta-analysis of the existing data about calcium. And he wrote a paper in 2002, in 2006, in 2010, in 2014, and 2018. And it is extraordinary that the same meta-analysis was carried out every few years based on 13 studies in a total of 15,730 women. 13 studies, remember, 15,730 women, the same study, again and again and again and again. And the World Health Organization, these very nice people that like to drink expensive wine and eat fondue in Geneva, looked at these papers and said that women should take calcium during pregnancy, 150 milligrams every day. And they said that in 2011 and 2016 and 2008. Interesting. What is very interesting is that the same people that wrote the Cochrane Review were also in the WHO that wrote this recommendation. Let us look at these 13 studies for which the women in the audience, when they get pregnant, will be forced by their gynecologists to take calcium. Now, a few years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. It's a cancer of the blood, which destroys the bone. I was also given this calcium to take. It is absolutely horrible. Horrible. Is it useful? Because if it is useful, it doesn't matter if it is horrible. Let us see the 13 studies for which women in Brazil take calcium. These are the studies. The biggest study is by Villar, who examined 4,100 and 8,300 women. So of the 15,000, the total, half were from this one study, and there was no effect. The second biggest study is by Levin, 2,163, 2,173, no effect. Interesting. And then this study from Iran, Niromanesh, 15 and 15, 30 women. Very good. And this study from a Latin American country, Lopez Jaramillo, 22 and 34, 50 cases. Very good. Lopez Jaramillo, 100 patients. Very good. Lopez Jaramillo, 250 cases. Very, very good. Sanchez Ramos, 60 patients. Fantastic. And they go to the Cochrane. They take these studies and they make an equal importance to Villar with Niromanesh. And they mix everything together and they say it's fantastic. Calcium reduces the rate of preeclampsia by more than 50%. Let me show you again the evidence in a different way. The first study, which accounts for 50% of the population, no effect. And we had the second study. Now it's 80% of the whole population, no effect. The third study, now it's 90% of all the data, no effect. And this is Niro Manesh and Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo, 10, 20, 30 cases, and they create this wrong conclusion that calcium is fantastic. The first three studies are similar, and then they add the silly studies, the ridiculous studies, and when they do so, they increase the heterogeneity of the whole studies to 70%, which means that the studies are so different that you cannot do a meta-analysis. Does Cochrane care? Does the WHO care? Does every doctor in Brazil care? Does the professional bodies of obstetricians in Brazil care? Nobody cares. Nobody cares, or they are not clever enough to understand what they are recommending. And yet, the only thing that really works, they don't recommend. This is modern medicine. I talked about preterm preeclampsia because if you have preeclampsia before 28 weeks, 30 weeks, 32 weeks, often, more than 90% of the cases, the baby will also be very small. And if you have such early preeclampsia, you have two options. You deliver the baby to save the mother, but then the baby dies in the neonatal unit from prematurity and growth restriction, or survives and often is handicapped because of the prematurity and the fetal hypoxia. However, because term preeclampsia is much more common than preterm preeclampsia, the overall contribution of term preeclampsia to maternal mortality and a high proportion of perinatal mortality and morbidity is because of term rather than preterm preeclampsia. And the question is, what can we do? Well, summary. With term preeclampsia at 12 weeks, we can identify only about 40% of the cases. And with aspirin, we don't prevent term preeclampsia. What can we do? We need to do a scan at 36 weeks. And I have been campaigning for the last few years that all women in all countries of the world should have 3 ultrasound scans in pregnancy, at least. One at 12, one at 20, and one at 36 weeks. And at 36 weeks, we can identify by screening 80% of term preeclampsia. And then what? Well, we have done a study where we randomized the women after screening at 36 weeks into a group where we managed them as usual, and the group where the score from prediction of preeclampsia was making us decide when to deliver the women. So if the risk for preeclampsia was extremely high, 1 in 2, we were delivering these women at 37 weeks. If it was 1 in 5, at 38 weeks. If it was 1 in 20, at 39 weeks, and so on. So the decision when to deliver women was made on the basis of the risk from screening at 36 weeks. And these are the results. 8,000 women were randomized, half into the concealed group and half into revealed and intervention group. And we found that we could reduce the rate of term preeclampsia by about 30% without increasing the rate of emergency cesarean section or neonatal unit admission, because that was our worry. So here now we have been able to predict and prevent the most severe early preeclampsia with screening at 12 weeks, and also term preeclampsia with screening at 36 weeks. Let me show you something that's very interesting. This is the orbit. This black ball is our eye. And this is the waveform we get from looking at the eye. It takes 5 seconds to look in the eye, 1 blood vessel, and we get this special waveform. And from this waveform, we can identify the majority of women that will develop preeclampsia soon. We have done studies at 36 weeks and 20 weeks and 12 weeks. And the blue line is normality. And the red circles are from women that will develop preeclampsia after a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. And you can see that in those that develop preeclampsia, the waveform is abnormal. It doesn't cost anything. It's the same ultrasound machine that they use to examine the baby. And it takes a few seconds to do this. I have now worked closely with with an Indian company, because the Indians are very clever, from Bangalore, in doing artificial intelligence. And you can take anybody. They don't need to be doctors. It can be the secretary of the clinic. And the app tells them how to put the transducer and how to change the angle. And you get the measurement of the ophthalmic artery. And when you do that, we then automatically trace the waveform with artificial intelligence, and it provides extremely accurate prediction of who is going to get preeclampsia. So here we are. We are able to do, in a very simple way, the ophthalmic artery. It doesn't cost any money, and you can predict who is going to get preeclampsia. So I thank you for listening to me. This is the last slide. This beautiful black woman is an American Olympic gold medalist who 2 years ago, at the age of 32, at 32 weeks in her pregnancy, died because of preeclampsia. Preeclampsia today can be predicted and prevented to a great extent. And we need to force the governments that are preoccupied with weapons to destroy the human race to continue to develop weapons to destroy everybody, because it's very important for us to kill each other, but spend a little bit of money in medicine to prevent women and babies from dying. So thank you very much for your attention.
Prof, thank you. It's always nice to listen to you. And it's nice to understand your philosophy of life that make us better doctors. I'm going to open for the audience for a couple of,
Yes,
and then we can end up.
thank you.
Alguma dúvida? Vocês querem fazer alguma pergunta? Prof, I have one. Actually, I have two questions. Three questions. The first one, for the Brazilian population, what is the best cutoff for screening? 1 in 100 or 1 in 150? First one. The second, it's very clear, but I would like to clarify. If I'm not from Africa, if I take milk and like to eat cheese, shall I use or not calcium? And the second one is, now I have uterine artery Doppler or ophthalmic Doppler or uterine and ophthalmic Doppler.
Three questions. I think that it is better to use a risk cutoff of 1 in 150. The reason for that is very simple. If we want to maximize the number of women that will be identified, the detection rate, we can tolerate a screen positive rate of 15%. In a few months, we will do a big study in Spain, in London, and in 3 African countries, in Senegal, in Gambia, and in Ghana. And the study that we will do is we will give 30% of the population a risk of 1 in 200, 250, and we will give them aspirin until 20 weeks. And then we will randomize them into 2 groups. One where we stop the aspirin after 24 weeks, and another where we continue until 36 weeks. If that study shows that by stopping at 24 weeks, we have an equally good prevention, then that would be quite beneficial, because some people worry of giving aspirin to women up to the 36th week, because if they go into labor, they worry that they will have more bleeding, or if they want to have an epidural. In the United States, the anesthetists are refusing to give the women an epidural. In England, of course, they do give an epidural. It doesn't worry them. But in America, everybody's worried about everything. So in reality, therefore, there's no reason why you should limit the number of women that can receive aspirin. Your second question was relating to calcium. I have shown you the evidence for calcium, and to me, it's very convincing that calcium is not beneficial in the prevention of preeclampsia. It's very clear, and we have published these results in the British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and I have presented these results to the World Health Organization and told them to wake up and to recommend proper screening and prevention rather than bad evidence-based prevention. Your third question was about the Doppler. To me, there's a big difference between the uterine artery and the ophthalmic artery. I have been fighting for the uterine artery for 30 years now. But you know, when you look in the pelvis, there are quite a few, and you put the color on, there are quite a few blood vessels. And although if you receive good training, you can identify the uterine artery, it's not so easy to train people and to do it accurately. But the ophthalmic artery is so very easy because there's only one vessel. And that is why it is easy. Now, I have spent £500,000, which is $600,000, to develop software that can calculate the risk for preeclampsia and the risk for preterm birth and the risk for gestational diabetes and fetal hypoxia and anemia. And this software is freely available to every doctor in the world. And in this software, we are able to calculate the risk for preeclampsia based on the ophthalmic artery and the uterine artery. I think that the benefit from doing both is marginal. I think it is sufficient to do the ophthalmic artery.
Good. One question here.
Quando a gente faz assim, alerta a esse, que tem que ser utilizado, mas a gente não está. A gente não está também.
I know that you had these questions many times. If the patient is allergic aspirin, what should I do?
I have been a doctor for many years. I'm very old. And I have never seen a woman that is allergic to aspirin. If they're allergic to aspirin, then of course they cannot take aspirin. One of the options is to take heparin, Flexane. But there are studies that have looked at the value of heparin on its own or in combination with aspirin for the prevention of preeclampsia, and it is not beneficial unless the women have autoimmune disease, systemic lupus erythematosus, or antiphospholipid syndrome.
Alguma mais? Pergunta ou não? So again, the question of calcium. If you have a low calcium diet, calcium doesn't work, or it's question of the diet, how you take aspirin, or sorry, calcium, or doesn't work in those who had calcium in the everyday, or in those that have not calcium every day.
Eduardo, can you see the slide?
Calcium, the meta-analysis? Yes. The meta-analysis here.
It's not a psychological problem for me. I'm a scientist and I look at the evidence. This is the evidence, nothing more and nothing less. Green, this is green. This is low calcium diet. This is adequate calcium diet. In the low calcium diet group, out of these studies, they examined 10,000 women. This is all the evidence, 10,000 women. And when you look at it, the combined data shows that calcium reduces the risk by 60%. But then look at the evidence. Of the 10,000, you see, 5,331 is the total in the experiment, and this is the calcium group, and 5,347 in the control group. 10,000. 4,000 out of the 5,000 was this study, one proper study. No effect. So you can either believe Villar or Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo and my mother and my cousin and the friend of Lopez Jaramillo from Uruguay and Paraguay and Iran. I don't believe these studies at all. These studies were sponsored by companies that were promoting either milk or calcium. And you cannot, who is crazy? Who is a scientist that compares the value of the Villar study with the silly studies, the stupid studies of Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo and Lopez Jaramillo? It is impossible. It is scientifically wrong. So calcium does not work either in low or in adequate calcium intake countries. This is the evidence. It's not my psychological problem. It's the evidence. Calcium does not work.
I think, Prof, is very clear. It's the same way of cervical assessment and progesterone. Pessary, and
Yes.
people make money through pessary. People put pessary, and pessary doesn't work. So
Yes.
I'd like to thank you. We are going to move on for the next presentations. Thank you. It's almost midnight, and it's always nice. And I know how you are hard work, and at this time you are giving lectures. Thank you, Prof.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good luck. Bye-bye.